Scuderia Ferrari, undeniably the most famous team in Formula 1, rolled out its brand new 2026 specification Grand Prix car at its own private Fiorano test track in Italy. This rollout gave us a great opportunity to get a first look at the new SF-26 design, and that's what makes up this video, a first few impressions of the car and a look at some of the details of the new design. At first glance, a look at the car reveals the basic layout of the machine, with a return to pushrod front suspension for the Italian team after a one-year experiment with pull rods in 2025. While there's really no consensus of engineering about pushrods versus pull rods in modern Formula 1 design, Ferrari does not seem to have settled on a particular layout. Over a decade ago, Ferrari built a few F1 cars with pull rods, but then reverted to push rods right up until 2025, when it trialled pull rods once again, and now is switching back to push rods. This indecision on suspension layout is likely to have taken up quite a bit of R&D time, at a time when the cost cap is a real factor in car development. How much the Maranello concept switch for 2025 impacted the 2026 design, well, that remains to be seen. At the rear of the car, there are pushrod actuated torsion bars, and these are integral to the transmission casing, so you can expect that the Haas car will also use this arrangement. Ferrari previously, though, had been pretty committed to a pull rod rear end, so another change of mind for the 2026 season. The nose tip of the car is raised in common with all 2026 designs, and it has a very small slot in its tip, probably for driver cooling, but on a chilly day at Fiorano, perhaps Charles and Lewis had somewhat chilly toes. The nose supports have a very three-dimensional shape and appear to be wider at the front than at the rear. They're also slightly twisted. From the side, it's possible to see just how far rearward they extend. Much of this will be for aerodynamic reasons rather than simply supporting the front wing. The front wing active aerodynamics actuator is on the centre line of the car, one of two options teams can take in 2026, the other option of course being twin actuators on the wing itself, shown here on the Racing Bulls concept renders. Behind the front wheel, the leading edge of the floor has a very substantial support structure, looking more like a suspension element than a mere support. I wonder if this is more to do with aerodynamic purposes than actually as a support. Note also the support bracing strut on the side of the floor as well. Note the positioning of the upper rear leg of the front wishbone. It's really quite low, isn't it? And we've seen designs like that before in the recent past. The front brake ducts are extremely interesting, similar in concepts to the design of the Mercedes. There are no conventional air scoops, with the inner plate being directed slightly inward towards the centre line of the car to direct cooling airflow into the gap between the tyre and that plate. The cooling outlet routing, though, is very clear to see in this image. This does seem to be something of a growing trend in 2026 car design. The front wing end plates are huge and very, very sculpted. As is the case with the Mercedes, they do not feature the upper aerodynamic elements seen on the show cars. However, unlike some other designs, there's also no vertical element evident on the footplate of the Ferrari end plate. Note the cutout on the trailing edge of the end plate and the apparent change in its cross-section. Ferrari has notably opted against centerline cooling on the car, with just a single, roughly triangular airbox duct on the roll hoop, and the roll hoop itself has two remote forward supports. Additionally, there's a small cooling inlet behind the driver's head. Of interest are the aerodynamic elements behind the main rollover structure. Similar concepts have been used by a number of teams over the years, with Haas using them most recently, though this Ferrari design seems to be a little different to that, but I suspect the purpose is the same. Interestingly, the aerodynamic element on the halo of the Ferrari is quite small compared to other designs, such as that seen on the Mercedes. Teams still have a region of freedom around the titanium halo structure, which can be used for aerodynamic purposes. The decision by Ferrari not to utilise centerline cooling has resulted in larger sidepod inlet ducts, and the shape of them is actually quite interesting, with a small aerodynamic element just ahead of the lower bit of the duct. I've had to use one of the renders from the team to show this part, but it appears to be the same on the real car, and it's managing airflow into the ducts and around the leading edge of the sidepod. And this airflow through the car is actually a hugely important, rarely discussed element of car design, so I really look forward to getting a look at these cars without the bodywork on. Note the mandatory rain light in the mirror housings. You're going to see that on every car in the field. There's a small cooling outlet on the upper bodywork just behind the cockpit, something seen on a number of recent cars, particularly Ferraris. Here's a nice look at the vertical element on the leading edge of the floor. It has three pretty chunky elements reducing in length as they go up the stack. There's also a neat vertical element at the leading edge of this section of bodywork. The overall side pod shape is very curved and droops downwards towards the rear of the car. There's also a notable undercut on the base of that side pod shape. The trailing edge shape of the side pod also looks really interesting. I want to have a closer look at that. The floor edge is perhaps not as complex as some designs we've seen from other teams already, but after all, this is just a rollout spec of the car, so I suspect there's significantly more to come in this part of the Ferrari. Note though that the Ferrari also features a hole towards the rear of the floor in the same vein as the Mercedes layout, which has generated so much discussion online already. Note the very chunky support on the leading edge of the floor. Looking rearward of that, the car seems to have a quite notable level of rake, with the rear ride height sitting higher than the front. That's something we expected to see on 2026 cars, rather like we saw in the run-up to the end of 2021. The engine cover fin on the Ferrari though has of course generated a huge amount of comment already online. I don't think that this is for a low radar cross section, though some people have suggested that online, rather that Ferrari may have found that this stepped shape has some advantages when the car is in yaw, when it's going through corners. The rear wing leading edge has raised outer edges and a flat central section where the twin pylons mount to it. Looking at the rear wing is interesting, and I think there's a lot more to learn about the cars in this area. Here's a very basic look at the rear end of the car. It's actually quite unusual for teams to allow a look at the rear of their cars during a shakedown run, but you can see two quite small aerodynamic elements either side of the exhaust exit. The rear brake cooling duct outlets can also be seen, and the treatment of elements around the top of the diffuser look to be really interesting, so a good look at these needs to be had at some point, and I think it could be quite revealing. In some ways you could say that elements of the Ferrari design might be a bit basic, but this is clearly a shakedown specification car, and there will be significant development to come in the coming weeks. Additionally, Ferrari has admitted that there is some flexibility in the overall car design to react to development directions, so it will be interesting to see how that happens. I think that's probably a decent first look at the new Ferrari, and remember, these really are just my initial notes on the design. There will likely be much more in-depth analysis on F1 TV in the coming weeks, and I also expect this car to develop quite a bit visually. I'm trying to do a video like this on each of the new cars as they roll out of their garages for the first time, so if you've enjoyed this and want to see more like that, then don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon, somewhere in the pit lane.